debate. The member from Guelph.
Thank you, Speaker. It's an honour to rise in this House and contribute to the debate on Bill 195. Speaker, I just want to take a moment to say that we're starting to hear a growing chorus of people outside this House from across the political spectrum who are starting to raise the alarm bells about this Bill 195. For example, in an editorial in yesterday's National Post, Christine Van Gen from the Canadian Constitution Foundation wrote, and I quote, "This power grab by the Premier is an unjustified violation of Charter-protected rights, and citizens should be concerned. Bill 195 is power-seeking, but it may be only the beginning. If these intrusions into our rights are not resisted, we may be at the beginning of a new policy cycle that seeks even longer-term and larger changes that further limit our rights. Emergency powers should apply only during emergencies, and any attempt to extend them beyond must be described as nothing more than a power grab." End quote. Let's move to the other side of the political spectrum, and let's hear what Michael Bryant, the Executive Director of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, has said, and I quote, "The proposed legislation is unnecessary and eliminates essential democratic controls over unprecedented emergency powers. It is a significant threat to democratic oversight that should be rejected." End quote. Or let's go to Lakehead University law professor Ryan Alford, who's described the bill as a power grab, and I quote, "Any attempt by the government to argue that the current crisis can justify the infringement of fundamental rights 2 years later is bound to fail. The precedent this would create is horrendous. A hypothetical state of affairs should never be the basis for an actual and substantial restriction of liberty." Speaker, my friends in the official opposition have quoted a number of Labour leaders, so I'll spare the House even more of those quotes. But go ahead, shall I say a few? But I'll just say, Speaker, I'm going to stick to what the legal experts are saying in my remarks. It is clear that legal experts from across the political spectrum are raising serious concerns about Bill 195, and it gives me pause. And I would recommend to my colleagues, I think a few of them actually are lawyers over there, I would think it would give them pause. And I would encourage them to listen to their legal colleagues and what they're saying about how Bill 195 threatens our constitutional and charter rights. At the very least, Speaker, at the very least, this bill should be going to committee so we can hear from legal experts, so we can hear from Labour leaders, so we can hear from average Ontarians about how this bill affects their constitutional rights and their civil liberties. The fact that, it appears we're going to vote on second reading and third reading in the same day on this bill, a bill that affects our fundamental rights, at the very least should go to committee. Speaker, the lessons we've learned from the COVID crisis has shown that we may need to bring some amendments to the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. But I must agree with former Attorney General Michael Bryant, who so aptly pointed out in an op-ed over the weekend that the time to amend such an important bill is not while we're in the middle of a pandemic. And I want to quote from his op-ed, "The problem with legislating during a crisis, when that legislation involves creating new government powers, is that it all ends up being like the notorious U.S. Patriot Act. In other words, it's always bad for your human rights." End quote. Or, because, speakers, I love a good hockey analogy, I'll quote Mr. Bryant one more time. "It's like changing the rules in the middle of the playoffs. It's never a good idea." Quote. Yeah, unless you're a Leafs fan, then the playoffs don't come often enough, do they? So, Speaker, the point I'm making here is that we need time for reflection. We need time to consult with the experts. We need time for collaboration and input from all parties in all parts of our society if we're going to even consider granting the government such extraordinary powers. And here's the thing, Speaker. Government has the ability to continue doing what they're doing with the emergency orders without changing the legislation. The government can extend the state of emergency right now, today. If we're in a state of emergency, I'm assuming that all members of this House would probably grant unanimous consent for that. That'd be my guess. If a second wave hits, the experts are telling us the second wave likely will hit. And if we have to move into another state of emergency, I've seen no indication over the last 4 months that any opposition party would oppose that. All of us, everybody in this House, we've all worked together to put the people of Ontario first. We've all said that the health and safety of the public comes first. I don't think anybody's indicated that they would block that. I certainly wouldn't be afraid to move and act quickly, to grant the government the powers they need to protect people. Haven't blocked it in the last few months. Don't know why we'd consider blocking it in the future. But to provide this government with emergency powers that affect our civil liberties, our constitutional rights, that affects collective bargaining agreement for frontline healthcare workers for up to 2 years, whether we're in a state of emergency or not, is wrong. And it's not in the best interest of Ontarians. So, Speaker, I urge my colleagues, especially those on the other side of the aisle, to reconsider Bill 195. The government's actions over the last few weeks leaves the impression that the Premier is against big government when it comes to spending money to help people, but he's all for big government when it comes to granting the Premier more power. And is that really the impression the members opposite want to leave the public? The extension of extraordinary powers should remain in the hands of MPPs. MPPs from all parties, representing all voices in our society, representing all geographical locations in our society. Speaker, it is dangerous to take that power out of the hands of democratically elected representatives when that power and the exercise of that power is so extraordinary. I'll be voting against Bill 195, and I encourage my colleagues to vote against it as well.